Hello and welcome to a brand new series of Perfect Night In, the podcast where guests share with us their perfect night of telly. I'm your host Neil Perryman, and today's special guest is the award-winning writer David Quantick, whose TV credits include The Day Today, Brass Eye, Jam, Smack the Pony, The Thick of It and Veep. He's also a novelist and a really lovely bloke. So without any further ado, let's go and meet him. Hello David, welcome to Perfect Night In.
Hello Neil, how are you?
I'm fine, I'm thrilled to have you as my first guest back, and you've chosen an incredibly interesting lineup of programmes to talk about. Now before we start, can I just ask you, where is this Perfect Night In taking place? Can you describe your ideal surroundings for this night of entertainment?
It would be in my front room with my wife Jenna there so that she could just go, why are we watching this?
I know that feeling, David.
I bet you do, I've read your books.
Okay, it's 6:30. Let's get your Perfect Night In underway.
You're about to see edited highlights from one of the lengthiest and most complex cases in legal history. Everything about it is highly fictitious, and the proceedings are not all that legally accurate.
So your evening kicks off with an episode of Crown Court. Why have you chosen this?
Well, this is the interesting thing. I mean, to me it's interesting, to you it probably isn't. When I was a teenager, in half terms and days off ill, there was very little in the way of afternoon TV. There weren't even Australians or medical things then, but there was Crown Court. And yes, I really, really enjoyed it. And then in later life, something extraordinary happened. I became interested in a surreal playwright called N.F. Simpson. Comic genius, was massively popular in the 1950s. He's just one of the great playwrights and comedy writers. And he got little bits of telly as well, but extraordinarily, even though he's the kind of writer who made Spike Milligan look like Richard Curtis, he was given an episode of Crown Court to write. And when I say episode, I mean a week's worth of telly.
Yeah, the episode we're talking about is called An Upward Fall.
One thing about N.F. Simpson, all his titles, almost all of them, somebody pointed out, are impossible. A Resounding Tinkle, One Way Pendulum, An Upward Fall. They're all nonsense.
So how did N.F. Simpson end up writing for Crown Court?
He did a lot of TV in the 70s. He did a fantastic Sherlock Holmes comedy called Elementary, My Dear Watson. Also, Simpson did some fantastic TV plays. He did a brilliant one for ITV called Silver Wedding. He just had a strange knack for writing things that looked normal. A bit like The Day Today. If you were out of the room, it looked normal till you went in the room. And the plot of An Upward Fall is, if memory serves me right, that the owners of an old people's home, which for some reason is on the end of a cliff, have provided toilet facilities at the bottom of the cliff, some 300 feet below. It's just nonsense. He invented, long before Python, the spiral of absurdity, in that somebody will pick up on one thing in a conversation and they will go on and on. There's a brilliant radio sketch he did where, you know the familiar thing where somebody says, the cathedral was built by Bishop Odo. He wrote a whole thing about a cathedral literally being built by a medieval bishop, and it goes on and on and on, and it's just horrifying. You know, the bishop bringing the enormous flagstones in and laying them, and the difficulty of building a bell tower on your... So, An Upward Fall is amazing because there are modern equivalents. You know, there was an episode of Doctors where there was a woman who thought everyone was Joe Pasquale, and I think that's because in those long-running cheap shows, every so often they're like, stuff it.
It is now for the defence to open its case. Now, whilst we're waiting for this to happen, this might be the moment to go outside the courtroom where witnesses are waiting to be called for other cases which are going on in the same building concurrently with our own and are passing the time in small talk.
And the glory of the show, of course, is that obviously all the lawyers and judges are played by actors and the witnesses, but the jury were members of the public. So normally they're sort of like, it's a straightforward burglary case and the 12 members of the public act like real jurors and produce a verdict in a normal case. In this case, literally in this case, they have to provide a verdict on 5 hours of near drivel. And you can see them, the cutaway shots are brilliant.
One of the jurors actually looks like Matt Lucas playing Elton John.
No, it is Matt Lucas playing Elton John.
What I love about it is it's so absurd, but everybody plays it completely straight.
The actors are fantastic. They're actors who've done a lot of stuff. Yeah, they're kind of slightly... It's a bit... Again, it's obviously like Rumpole in the sense that it's slightly corny. That's what, barristers are. They are hams. So it does work. But yeah, none of the actors crack a smile. And it sends up the absurdity of law. That's why another reason it's great for N.O. Simpson. Because law is basically people going, was the lid on the jar? And if the lid was a screw top, these things, this obsession with trivia, it's quite wonderful.
It is now some 300 years or so, is it not, since gravity was discovered by Sir Isaac Newton.
Well, I suppose that would be so.
Indeed, he had been hunting high and low for it, had he not over a considerable period of time.
I wouldn't know about that.
And the search was finally crowned with success, if legend is to be believed, when he came upon it, so we are told, in the back of a boot and shoe cupboard, to which he'd gone in search for something else.
He said to me, because I did a radio documentary about him, and he said to me that his mum died when he was about 7, and he was never able to write narrative because of that, which is an extraordinary claim. But I kind of like the idea that once your life has exploded, you're like, well, there is no narratives. Because, what is story? Story is something that we've invented to make sense of the world and the fact that we die. There's a catchy T-shirt. And if you don't believe that there is a narrative to life, that there is a point to it, then you don't believe in story. So it's actually kind of a point. He's just a brilliant, brilliant genius.
On that somewhat unsettling note, we must leave Crown Court for today. Join us tomorrow for another instalment in the case of Cosmic Planning Consultants versus the Rosenberg Research Foundation.
Crown Court takes us up to 7 p.m, and your next choice features another trial.
I saw Doctor Who from my pram, according to my dad. Begs the question, what was I doing in a pram when I was 1.5? But those were, lean times. So yeah, I've been watching Doctor Who all my life. You literally grow up with Doctor Who. I was a little kid for William Hartnell, and then as I was an older kid and getting into books, Patrick Troughton comes along, and he's in the world of literature quite often. My favourite episode is the one where they go into the land of childhood. And I loved that. It was like kind of a bit like the Avengers. And then when I was an older teenager going to secondary school, it was John Pertwee with his karate and his cars. He was basically a big boy. Then as I got into Hitchhikers and that sort of thing, it turned into Hitchhikers, to some extent, and the Tom Baker years. Then, I'm going to stop in a second, don't worry. Then I went to London to be a student. I didn't have a television, and Peter Davidson was 3, and it was Tristram from a different show. So I missed out. I stopped watching Doctor Who until Sylvester McCoy. And I watch it now with my son, and we've just got to Matt Smith, and it's great going... Well, as you may know, it's great going back.
And you've actually written a couple of Doctor Who stories, haven't you, David?
I did a big finish for Sylvester McCoy and Ace, and I looked it up the other day, and according to someone online, it has been voted the worst big finish of all time, which really makes me happy. There's a writer called Nev Fountain writes these books that are basically about Doctor Who companions being killed at conventions. What I hadn't known was the whole world of Doctor Who, that once you're in, So yeah. Sophie Aldred is going like, yeah, we went, it was the launch last week of, the new series, and we were all there, and they all go, which I just think is fantastic.
And the episode you've chosen for your Perfect Night In is the War Games episode 10. Why have you chosen this one?
I've chosen that because it's a classic Troughton. Troughton is like I used to say he was my favourite, but it's probably Tom Baker from that era. But Troughton is he's a really important Doctor. He's the first regeneration. He's the first change of character. That is amazing. Normally in a TV series, when you replace the actor, you get some poor sort having to be the new Captain Kirk or whatever. So he was a great switch. It was a brilliant idea. The War Games is a classic one again, people from different worlds trapped together. That's a great Doctor Who trope.
In every one of these time zones, thousands of human beings fought and died in the belief that they were on their own planet. The survivors have now all been returned to their own times on the planet Earth, but the death roll is beyond counting. These lives were squandered in the course of a vicious and diabolical scheme to gain control of the entire galaxy.
And this is a really important episode as well, isn't it? Because this is the first time the Doctor goes back to his home planet, he's put on trial, exiled to Earth, and regenerates.
Yeah, it's been going long enough for the people to go, let's just answer some bloody questions, because obviously there's no internet and stuff, but people are saying, where's he from? What's a Time Lord? You know, and so they decide to build into it, and it's a great way of doing a regeneration, because the last one had been a bit like, oh, I feel a bit queer, thud. Oh, look at me. So it's a great way of doing something with it, of acknowledging as you say, it's the first big world of Doctor Who. My other reason for having it is that they filmed a lot of it near Burling Gap in Sussex, where I got married.
I think one of the striking things about this regeneration is you don't see the actor he regenerates into in this episode, and it's actually a cliffhanger.
I mean, there is the thing that people didn't analyse so much then. Now, we do it this way because there's no choice, you know, to be honest. The moment you see Ncuti Gatwa's face in the paper, the moment it's announced, everybody can picture the regeneration anyway, which was a good reason to make it a different kind of regeneration this time. So you've got no choice, really. You might as well do it and see the exciting moment. And the regeneration has become a great moment where, you know, it's almost as important as seeing the new Doctor. You know, is he going to mention his teeth again? That sort of thing. But, you know, back in 1960, whatever, people weren't going, oh, I hope it's George Lazenby. You know, when John Pertwee got it, people were like, oh, don't really know who he is, but he was in the Navy Lark. Imagine.
But you can't condemn me to exile on one primitive planet in 1 century in time? Besides, I'm known on the Earth. It might be very awkward for me.
Your appearance has changed before, it will change again, and that is part of the sentence.
You can't just change what I look like without consulting me!
You will have an opportunity to choose your appearance.
Oh, well, that's not so bad, but I warn you, I'm very particular.
Doctor Who takes us up to 7:30, and we're staying with the sci-fi theme for your next choice. Of course, Star Trek, and you have chosen the Season 2 episode, Patterns of Force.
I have chosen Patterns of Force because when I was a kid, I was into war. Both my parents had been children in World War II. As anyone will tell you, the war was everywhere in the 60s and 70s. You know, from Dad's Army to the World at War, every toy. It's weird, my kids don't play guns. They don't play cowboys, they don't play soldiers, but in those days, you know, you were shooting people constantly. There was a fantastic thing. You could make people better. You would just run up to them, touch them with 2 fingers and say, 2-4. So war and the desperate urge to own a Batman suit, which only one kid had. War was part of life, and I grew up making models, all that. And the Star Trek one is the Nazi one, let's be honest here. It's a brilliant concept. Somebody goes to a planet, decides it needs bringing up to speed, and thinks the most efficient model is Nazism.
Why did you interfere with this culture?
Planet fragmented, divided. Took lesson from Earth history.
But why Nazi Germany? You studied history, you knew what the Nazis were.
Most efficient state Earth ever knew.
You can see his point, because if you go around Starfleet and you're like, oh God, look at them all, they're snogging every week and they're just lounging about, eating grapes because they've had their minds transferred or whatever. Basically, Star Trek is kind of the hippie navy. But yeah, I mean, it combined 2 of my interests, science fiction and Nazis, so it was fantastic. It's got a lot of good tropes in it. It's got Spock in a woolly hat, which is always good, and it deals with the whole kind of fascism, anti-Semitism thing pretty well, not in a tawdry manner. And the fact that, you know, Shatner and Nimoy are both Jewish as well is not irrelevant, I think. It's done really well, you know. And a lot of people say now, it's a clever thing to say, it's like, oh, I don't like Star Trek because it's military. And it's kind of not really, you know. There's something about Star Trek. I mean, I was shocked once because Jim Davidson said it had taught him everything about life. And it's like, it clearly hasn't.
How could a man as brilliant, a mind as logical as John Gill's, have made such a fatal error?
You drew the wrong conclusion from history, I think. The problem with the Nazis wasn't simply that their leaders were evil, psychotic men. They were. But the main problem, I think, was the leader principle.
What he's saying, Spock, is that a man holds that much power, even with the best intentions, just can't resist the urge to play God.
Thank you, Doctor. I was able to gather the meaning.
I'm a fan of the whole thing in general. Again, in the 80s, when I was clearly on drugs, I missed The Next Generation, which made watching the films a bit difficult, because you're like, what? What's going on? Who's that? And in the end, I just did analogues. I thought, oh, Data is Spock, and after that, you just get completely lost. But yeah, some of the modern Treks are a little bit discussion programme. Oh, God, there's one with a trial in it in Discovery, and it all ended up with the actors all clapping someone. Really was Rainbow Coalition of Love for all mankind. And it's like, you know, in Star Trek in the old days, it was like, we love everyone, but we're going to kill everyone to show how much we love them.
Okay, David, Star Trek takes us up to 8:30, and there's a slight change of pace for your next choice.
Roseanne started off as a kind of blue-collar sitcom based on the character of Roseanne Barr, who was kind of a mouthy, would not take it lying down housewife character. And started off, it was funny, it was well written, had a great cast, pretty much everyone in it has had a great career. And then, basically, Roseanne Barr sort of stepped in, her version anyway, and took over the creative control. And there's a quote which said, the network thought it was a show about fat people. An awful lot of so-called working class sitcoms are very meat and potatoes. They seem to be based on the idea that if you're not middle class, if you didn't go to Oxford, you can't take wit, you can't take surrealism, you can't take strangeness. And Roseanne just reversed all that. It was about the trials of an ordinary family who hadn't got money. It was about domestic issues, but also it was so funny. It was witty. There were brilliant jokes in it, some of which probably a bit aged. It was really surreal. One of my favourite moments is when the young woman who played Becky left and was replaced with a couple of jokes about it. But the post-credit sequence was a 1970s sitcom type sequence called There Are Two Beckys. And they wrote a song. There are two Beckys.
They walk alike, they talk alike, abruptly leave the show alike. You could lose your mind when Becky's ain't two of a kind.
It was beautifully done, and oh God, there's a line which I will get wrong. They're talking about someone who's stupid, and I think Roseanne says that she's stupid, and I think Roseanne says we're so stupid that the light from stupid will still take 5 million years to reach us. And you don't get that in Mrs. Brown's Boys.
And which episode of Roseanne have you chosen for your perfect night in?
Almost at random, a Halloween episode, because they were the Roseanne specials. Instead of the Christmas special, which I think they also did, they would just try and top themselves, not literally, with a Halloween special with ridiculous costumes and just the whole palaver of Halloween.
I hate Halloween.
Oh, you don't even know what Halloween is.
Well, why don't you not tell me about it?
Okay, I won't. Halloween is the one night of the entire year where the veil is lifted between the living and the dead. And the dead return from hell to walk the earth. And we have to dress up like ghosts and goblins and stuff to fake out the evil spirits, or else they might carry us back to hell with them.
So why do the dead people come back?
For the candy. There's no chocolate in hell. That's why it's hell.
I know you'll disagree with this because Roseanne Barr is rightly vilified for her insane opinions about cannibalism and worse. But when they brought Roseanne back, before COVID, it was really interesting. Before Roseanne went mad again, it was an attempt to do something with, what we'd now call the MAGA Trump fans. Because the idea was brilliant that Roseanne was a Trump fan and Jackie, her sister, was a Democrat. So that instead of just the usual kind of Hollywood, oh look, here come some Donald Trump fans, I bet they are eating their own feet, they had a character who was a Trump supporter and they discussed stuff in a funny manner. And that's not done normally. It's just the assumption that, either you're a country and Western fan and it's a redneck sitcom, or you're a Frasier fan. And just to finish, even when Roseanne was sacked, the Connors which was the kind of keep it going sitcom when they made it into a family show. It was good, even though they had, you know, the elephant in the room, or the elephant that had left the room. But there were two Beckys in it.
Meet Lacey, the one you used to see from 88 to 93. But Sarah came and took her place because she had a similar face. That's life on TV, but they're Becky's.
I mean, Roseanne is so important to me. One of my favourite Roseanne things. Did you know, fact fans, if you watch The Big Bang Theory, which is also Roseanne Extended Universe, they've got a tiny version of the crochet blanket from Roseanne's sofa on their couch.
And on that bombshell, we've reached the halfway point of your perfect night in, David. Before we continue, can I get you something to eat? A nice snack, perhaps?
My parents' house, it would be cheese and biscuits and a cup of tea.
Any particular type of cheese?
Just a nice domestic cheddar.
Grate it, bake it, stack it, snack it, soup it, scoop it, chill it, grill it, any way you please it, cheese it. You can toast it, you can host it, share it, pair it, any way you please it, cheese it. Cram with calcium, packed with protein too, lots of vitamins, good for me and you. There's 100 ways to eat it, but there's no way you can beat it, any way you please it, cheese it.
Can I ask you a personal question?
I'm already married.
What's your favourite flavour of Monster Munch?
I don't have a favourite flavour of Monster Munch.
Thanks, David. That's completely killed any chance of a Monster Munch sponsorship deal for this podcast. Anyway, it's 9 p.m. Let's get the second part of your perfect night in underway.
Big Twin Peaks fan when it went out originally. Me and my flatmate Dave it was appointment television. We would watch it all, although we were out the night that Laura Palmer's killer was announced, which was devastating. But no, loved Twin Peaks the first time, was one of them people who used to say damn fine coffee, loved the music. As an NME journalist, did a phone interview with Julie Cruz, who sang various songs in the show. And then time passed, as time does. And, you know, like a lot of people, tried to watch Fire Walk with me and so on and stuff like that, and enjoyed the Twin Peaks rip-offs, well, the X-Files, enjoyed David Lynch and all that. And then the limited series came along, and it was like, I'll give it a go. It's probably going to be like, I don't know, Frasier for drug addicts. It was brilliant. It's weird because I went back recently and watched the first series of Twin Peaks, and it's like a soap. Because they'd aimed it so well to get, you know, the crossover thing, so it's not just nutters who like Eraserhead. It is a teen soap with little hints about the spirit world in it. And it's almost shocking that it's just full of good-looking teenagers, and every so often there's somebody talking backwards in a room with a really nice floor. But Twin Peaks the Limited Series is how I remember Twin Peaks the first time. Absolutely, relentlessly strange and terrifying. And it's got the David Lynch thing of you don't know why you are frightened.
This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and ascend. The horse is the white of the eyes, and dark within.
And you've chosen the notorious episode 8 for your perfect night in. Can you summarise the episode at all, David?
There's basically a girl who goes out for a 1950s date and a thing comes to her house and it's horrible. There's the men covered in oil who take over a radio station and kill people. There's what appears to be an explanation of everything in Twin Peaks, which makes, of course, no sense. It's absolutely beautiful, absolutely terrifying, and would probably only make sense if you went to university to have it explained to you. It's beautiful, you know, it's like music. It doesn't have much of a narrative. It's the one where, you know, you're one side or the other, I think, with that. It's an episode that starts in the 50s, so it is kind of a nod to 1950s Cold War sci-fi. You know, it makes sense. David Lynch's roots would be in that world as well. So yeah, it's like everything, like the couple in it, the lovely teenage couple. It's almost a flashback to Blue Velvet, you know, a really sweet small-town couple whose lives are torn apart by a horrific entity. That's kind of David Lynch entry level, that is. But yeah, It's an extraordinary episode.
Got a light? Got a light? Got a light?
There's a clip somebody put up on YouTube. They're filming something and a woman makes the mistake of saying something like, you know, we could probably edit this, or we could cut this down or make it shorter. And Lynch just goes off on me, goes, make it shorter. What's the fucking obsession with making things fucking shorter?
What is this with everybody?
No.
What is it? Really?
Only me. It's
Why?
my fault.
I'm serious. Fucking A, man. It drives me nuts. Who gives a fucking shit how long a scene is?
Were you satisfied with the way Twin Peaks The Return ended, or did it leave you frustrated?
I was disappointed because I wanted it to be tied up and I wanted everyone to be happy. Well, it's a bit like watching Twin Peaks and wanting it to have a happy ending. It's like, did you not see the previous 30 years of television? I mean, I would love there to be more. Can I also just have a shout out for the humour? I can't go through all the flipping characters, but the Las Vegas Carl MacLachlan, those sequences are... And Naomi Watts, because I was feeling a bit queasy at first about celebrity appearances. You know, I really hate it when they have... It's like in Doctor Who when they had Frank Skinner. It's like, really? And in Twin Peaks Limited Series, there's a bit of that. But Naomi Watts is fantastic in it. And it's just... I love the Las Vegas sequences. If it had come back and it had been sort of watered down X-Files, I would have been horrified. But it came back and it was just... It's like, Leonard Cohen, you want it darker?
Where did you get this? Did you get this at the Silver Mustang? Huh? Dougie? Don't tell me you hit the jackpot.
Mr. Jackpots.
Twin Peaks takes us up to 10 p.m. And what have you got for us next?
This is BBC Two. Now, Bob Harris introduces this week's edition of the Old Grey Whistle Test.
I've chosen this because I loved the show. I started watching it as it lost its senses, or direction really, during the punk era, because it had been, you know, very happy and conservative with Bob Harris and album tracks, and of course that kind of knocked it on its side because it was an album show where bands would come on and play a track from their album, but punk and new wave were very singles orientated. So things were happening really quickly. You know, we weren't waiting for the Sex Pistols album, we were waiting for the singles. And it took a long time to readjust. And getting Annie Nightingale, you know, who's one of the all-time greatest British DJs, getting Annie in as a presenter with her enthusiasm and her slight crossover interest was fantastic. And they did end up with some brilliant performances. Public Image Limited is a famous one. But the one I'm sort of focusing on, The Damned, where they do the whole Damned routine, perform some of their best songs, and inevitably kick all their instruments over. It's a brilliant moment.
They're back together. Rat Scabies, Captain Sensible, Dave Vanian, and a new bass player, Alistair Wood. They just made a new album and very kindly consented to join us in the studio tonight to play a selection from it. Ladies and gentlemen, The Damned.
I'm a huge fan of The Damned. They were underdog punk. They did the first punk single, the first punk album, then they did an album no one liked, then they split up, and that should have been it. And they were kind of like my mates at school like them, and they were like my mates at school, you know. They were funny. They were not sexy. They were a bunch of misfits, and also they shouldn't have worked because they didn't have a look. One of them was a vampire, one of them was kind of a beaky Keith Moon, one of them was a bit of a punk, one of them was dressed, you know, in a red... They didn't look like they even knew each other.
I don't even care if I'm the dumbass. Don't wanna be a stuff like that. I'm the rest.
It still blows my mind that one of them will have a #1 hit single with Happy Talk in a few years' time.
The last 50 years since punk has taught you that people will change careers abruptly, do anything they want. I would say the great thing about punk is it enables you to have a #1 with Happy Talk from South Pacific. It was just fun, and Captain Sensible went on to make some other much better solo singles, working with Robin Hitchcock and Mike Mansfield. And The Damned, the songs that they do on the Whistle Test from the album Machine Gun Etiquette is one of the best comebacks ever. They lose Brian James, their songwriter, and they come back and they're even better. And they continued and, continued to make great records. They're still worth seeing. I love The Damned.
You must bear in mind that these studios are haunted by The Who. That was The Damned with Smash It Up, and I just can't be happy today. I think they enjoyed themselves.
Because they had no audience, you felt it was a performance for you. It's whenever they had an audience and it spoiled it, you were just watching people watching a gig. Whereas because the band were playing to the cameras, literally, there was no one else there apart from the presenter who would turn around in his chair and stroke his beard. And because it was done famously in a tiny continuity studio, it felt like it was just for you, that you were looking in on a rehearsal. Then the 80s came, and the Whistle Test was Mark Ellen and David Hepworth, and it became a bit country rock, alt country, all that kind of thing. And then the new shows came, and they were youth shows. The Tube and Switch and Big World Cafe. Terrible name for even a Big World Cafe. Yeah, and then it became youth orientated, and later is, I don't know what it's meant to be.
Tonight on Whistle Test we've got Rex Higgins, Steve Flea, the Wretched Admiral Sphincter, Grunties, Hot Nadgers, Red Buttocks and Toad the Wet Sprocket, so it promises to be really good.
We're staying with the music theme for your next choice, David, at 10:45.
So now on BBC Two, Rock Family Trees charts the turbulent years of one of the best heavy rock groups of all time.
I've chosen this because I loved them when they were in Sounds, the rock paper. Pete Frame, brilliant designer. As a nerd, I was fascinated by all the shapes of the family trees and the different members leaving and joining different bands. It gave a real sense of rock music being this weird world where the keyboard player from a punk band could turn up in a prog rock band and all that kind of thing. I own a rock family tree. They printed some off, and I've got Susie and the Banshees, the Buzzcocks and Magazine on my wall as we speak. So yeah, that was cool. And then when they did it as a TV series, I was in, because all those stories, now Fleetwood Mac have become the go-to band for lineup changes and fascinating soap opera. But Deep Purple were my boys,
The story of Deep Purple and its offshoots, bands such as Rainbow, Whitesnake and Gillan, reads like an A to Z of British hard rock and heavy metal. First formed in 1968, Deep Purple's roots extend back into the R&B boom of the early 60s. Founder members cut their teeth in such groups as the Outlaws, Screaming Lord Sutch, MI5 and Johnny Kidd and the Pirates.
When I was at school in the sixth form getting into punk and that, I had a few friends and older kids that I knew who really liked Deep Purple, so they got overly represented on the school sixth form record player. And because Deep Purple had kind of, they'd split up and not split up, but basically you could go out and buy records by Rainbow and Whitesnake and the Ian Gillan Band, who were all spin-offs from Deep Purple, and they all had Smoke on the Water on the B-side, which I thought was brilliant. Whatever band you were in, if you had any connection to Deep Purple, you had to do Smoke on the Water live as a B-side. That was a law. It was repealed by Thatcher. It's one of the few good things she did. But yeah, and the Deep Purple story is fairly standard, They were a 60s, slightly psychedelic band, got rid of their original singer, got in Ian Gillan, who'd been in Jesus Christ Superstar, the album. They had a hothead guitarist, Richie Blackmore, and for a while, they were just the best rock band in the world. They were fantastic. Because no one could get on with Richie Blackmore, particularly Ian Gillan, they had line-up changes to satisfy anyone. And they were always kind of getting back to that platonic ideal of Gillan and Blackmore that never quite happened. Yeah, they were absolutely fantastic. The live album Made in Japan is definitely in the top 1 live albums of all time.
They ditched the name Roundabout and decided to make a list of new names.
The list got huge. I mean, there was all sorts on it. Concrete God, I remember, was very strongly favoured at one point. Orpheus was another one. And several, do please remember it was 1968.
People would come up with ridiculous names, and every so often Richie Blackmore would say, like Deep Purple. Because we all knew it was the title of a song, you know, hit song, Nino Tempo and April Stevens. Deep Purple.
Richie's spoken to his grandmother. This new band you've got, are you going to play my favourite song, aren't you? And he'd said, what's that, Grandma? And she said, I like that song, Deep Purple. That's a lovely little song, you know. So it is Richie's grandma's favourite song.
Richie Blackmore is basically a twat in a hat. He's got this weird moustache, and he's always filmed with his girlfriend, and they're holding lutes and dressed in black. You're like, waste of a talent.
It's a shame that Richie Blackmore doesn't actually appear in this documentary.
He probably refused. I mean, he turns up, he's traceable in other documentaries. I'd forgotten he wasn't in that. But then you've got John Lord, who was the daddy of the band. You know, the big bear of a man who was immune to all the nonsense.
The sensible one.
Yeah, sensible, but also someone who wrote a concerto for group and opera orchestra and had it performed with Deep Purple and the Philharmonic Orchestra at the Albert Hall. Yeah, it was his vanity project, and they didn't go back there ever again.
The news had still not been broken to Rod Evans and Nick Simper, but rumours were flying around the London music scene.
It came to the ears of a very close friend of mine. So he said, I've heard this rumour, he said, that you and Rod are leaving. They got 2 new guys in. Oh, I said, every time a band has a bit of success, you hear these rumours. No, he said, I think it's true. And I just said, that's rubbish. I had that much faith in the band, and I had that much faith in the guys I was involved with. I just totally dismissed it.
We got our management to call Rod and Nicky. Terribly cowardly thing to do.
One of the lovely things about metal, and they're not metal, they're hard rock, is the interchangeability. They're like rappers. That, you know, Ian McGillan is in Black Sabbath for a month and doesn't really know why. And he's replaced by Ronnie James Dio, who was in Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. And it's like football teams, I imagine. You know, they're just sort of sold to other groups. They're just to me, they're the archetype of a rock band. They kind of remove the need for Led Zeppelin.
And of course, to top it all off, you got a lovely voiceover from John Peel.
Yeah, I mean, that slightly changed the tone of it, makes it a little bit more wry. If they'd had Tommy Vance, the world would have exploded.
Okay, David, that takes us up to 11:30, and your final choice of the night is a film.
Time Bandits was just an obvious choice for me to go and see when I was a teen. You know, Michael Palin and Terry Jones wrote it, Terry Gilliam directs it, John Cleese is in it, one of the best cameos of all time. And to me, it was a perfect movie. It was just such a great idea. It was really funny. There's a boy called Kevin. He's a young lad. He lives with his parents, who are obsessed with the consumer society, and like all the best parents in kids' stories, have no interest in him whatsoever. Then one night, a bunch of strangers appear in his bedroom, running away from a giant head, and he follows them. They're the Time Bandits. They're the people who work on repairing the universe, but they've decided to become thieves, having stolen a map of time, and travel in time to rob people, and of course they're crap at it. Meanwhile, God is after them. Meanwhile, the devil, played brilliantly by David Warner as evil, is after them as well. There's a famous speech where he's criticising God's creations. Parrots, nipples for men.
God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men. Slugs. Slugs? He created slugs. They can't hear, they can't speak, they can't operate machinery. I mean, are we not in the hands of a lunatic?
It's one of the funniest characters, and his attitude to his staff, one of whom is brilliantly called Benson, because he just keeps vaporising people. And I could quote huge chunks of it. There's a bit at the end, no spoilers, where the Supreme Being is revealed to, of course, be Rafe Richardson. And somebody questions him about something, to which he says, I am the Supreme Being, you know, I'm not entirely stupid.
It definitely has an amazing cast. You've got Shelley Duvall, Sean Connery.
Allegedly, it's said in the original script, he takes off his mask to reveal Sean Connery or someone else we can't afford. And Connery liked it. And it adds a new level to it because it's not silly. It's about longing for parents and longing for a child. And he's the still centre of the movie. It's great that, you know, this Greek king is a fireman. That, you know, he's really cool, goes around saving people. There's a brilliant cameo moment when they meet Robin Hood and two of the merry men are having an arm wrestling contest. And one of them arm wrestles the arm off the other.
You're all robbers,
the best, Mr. Hood.
Jolly good. And you're a robber, are you? Jolly good. And do you enjoy robbing then?
Well, it helps pay the rent, sir.
Jolly good. And you're a robber too, are you? How long have you been a robber?
4'1".
Good Lord.
What's also interesting to me is that you can always tell if somebody went to Oxford or Cambridge because their comedy film is in sections. Like Richard Curtis films are always in sections because they come from sketches, so they write chunks. And Python particularly, made no bones about it. They would write a load of scenes and stick them together, and that's what Time Bandits is as well.
What the hell is going on up here? I told you to put that light out and get to bed, and no more noise.
I had the terrible bad luck of getting into Monty Python just as John Cleese left. And I had some records and stuff, and they were good, but I'd be watching these episodes thinking, what is this? This 20-minute sketch set in a shop with nothing funny in it. And I've always had an ambivalent relationship with Python, that when it's good, it's brilliant, and generally it's Cleese. But when it's bad, it is just, stop it.
And this is how David Quantick's Perfect Night In shapes up. It all begins at 6:30 when Fulchester Crown Court presides over one of the most surreal and complex cases in legal history. And this is followed by another trial at 7 when Doctor Who is accused of being a bloody nuisance. Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock find themselves up against neo-Nazis in Star Trek at 7:30. And we join Roseanne as she celebrates Halloween at 8:30. At 9, we return to the town of Twin Peaks in search of a light, and that's followed by a smashing performance from The Damned on the Old Grey Whistle Test at 10. At 10:45, Deep Purple are the subject of an especially dysfunctional edition of Rock Family Trees, and our evening concludes with the movie Time Bandits, which features Sean Connery, nipples for men, and 43 species of parrots. And that's David Quantick's Perfect Night In.
So, David, before we go, what is it you're up to at the moment?
Well, I'm working on I've got a radio show with French and Saunders called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane Austen. Series 3 coming up. I've got a book of short stories coming out with an indie, but the main thing is I am kickstarting a novel called The Hyena. This is about a surrealist writer, a woman called Deborah Parkinson in the 1930s, who never becomes famous, but inevitably meets everybody who does become famous, and her voyage through life, and it's funny and emotional and ludicrous.
Good luck with that, David. I'll leave a link to that Kickstarter in the description of this podcast, and I believe you've got until the 21st of November to back it. Now, before you go, David, one final question. If you could spend this perfect night in with anybody at all, living or dead, who would it be?
Gosh, Brian Ferry. He'd probably offer me a whiskey and I'd go, no, Brian, I don't drink. And he'd go, how about a martini? I'd go, if Brian Ferry offers you a martini, you always say yes, so I'd be able to get drunk. Also, he might tell me a bit about his recording career, and that would be most enjoyable.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Neil.
Mr. Jackpot.